What's up, family? It's Caden with Urban Finance. Today we're going to be doing a book review of Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. This is a must-read book for any student of history, especially those that love Black history. If you haven't already, please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel. Booker T. Washington isn't actually sure when he was born. Being born a slave, there was a lack of concern for masters to actually track when they were born. He was most likely born between 1858 and 1859. His mother was a slave, and his father was most likely a white man that lived on one of the nearby plantations. From the time he can remember anything, almost every day of his life was occupied with some type of labor. The slave grapevine. Booker T. Washington never understood as a child how the slaves kept themselves so informed with the events that were going on around them. Before his masters knew about what was happening, the slaves would have already gotten news. From the time that Garrison, Lovejoy, and others began to agitate for freedom, the slaves throughout the South kept in close touch with the progress of the movement. Every success of the Federal armies and every defeat of the Confederate forces was watched with the keenest and most intense interest. Often before the white people received the news, the slaves got it. The news was usually gotten from the colored man who was sent to the post office for the mail. While many would naturally assume that slaves would hate their master, on the plantation like his or on any plantation of the South in which that the slave was treated with any type of decency, they were actually affectionate to their masters, in a most genuine sense. I recall the feeling of sorrow which existed among the slaves when they heard of the death of Mars Billy. It was no sham sorrow but real. Some of the slaves had nursed Billy. Others had played with him when he was a child. Mars Billy had even begged for mercy in the cases of others when the overseer or master was trashing them. The sorrow when he died in the slave quarters was only second to that in the big house, even though Mars Billy was fighting to defend slavery. And when the males were out fighting to protect the institution of slavery, they left their most trusted slaves to protect their wives, mothers, and children. And you would have had to cross the dead bodies of the slaves to get to them. That is how much affection some of the slaves had for their masters. This in no way meant they didn't want their freedom. He had not met one slave that didn't want their freedom. This was just how loyal these slaves were to their masters. He tells another story of an ex-slave traveling hundreds of miles away from his master, who traveled back to his master after slavery was finished to finish paying for his freedom. Not because he had to pay for his freedom, after all, slavery was over, but it was because he gave his master his word before slavery ended. The right type of knowledge is power. The first education that Booker T. Washington learned was that hard work always pays off. Regardless of the job that he had, he did it with such exceptionalism that the white people that he worked for were always amazed and always requested his service. The second lesson he learned was that those who are the happiest are those who do the most for others. These two lessons are the things that contributed to his remarkable success in life. After slavery ended, Black people had a thirst for knowledge that was unparalleled. In every part of the South, during the Reconstruction period, schools, both day and night, were filled to overflowing with people of all ages and condition, some being as far along in age as 60 and 70 years. The ambition to secure an education was most praiseworthy and encouraging. During the whole of the Reconstruction period, our people throughout the South looked to the federal government for everything, very much as a child looks to its mother. This was not unnatural. After all, the central government gave them freedom, and the whole nation had been enriched for more than 2 centuries by the labor of the Negro. But the government failed to make provisions for the general education of Black people. While many people of his stature entered political life, he resisted the temptation. Although he came close to it, and many tried to push him in that direction, he reasoned that there were better ways that he could help his people than through politics. For him, entering politics would have been more of a self-serving endeavor, and his passion was to uplift his race. After returning to his hometown after completing Hampton, he worked as a teacher, preparing several of the young men and women in addition to his two brothers to also go and enter Hampton Institute. He later went to study in Washington, D.C. to further his education. While the students in Washington knew more of the Greek and Latin, and families had more money, and were probably smarter intellectually, they were less prepared for life and were more focused on their appearance and vanity than those at Hampton. I saw young colored men who are not earning more than $4 a week spend $2 or more for a buggy on Sunday to ride up and down Pennsylvania Avenue in order that they might try to convince the world that they were worth thousands. I saw other young men who received $75 or even $100 per month from the government who were in debt at the end of every month. I saw men who but a few months previous were members of Congress, then without employment and in poverty. The members of this class had little ambition to create a position for themselves, but wanted the federal officials to create one for them. How many times I wished then, and have often wished since, that by some power of magic, I might remove the great bulk of these people into the country districts and plant them upon the soil, upon the solid and never deceptive foundation of Mother Nature, where all nations and races that have ever succeeded have gotten their start. At start that at first may be slow and toilsome, but one that nevertheless is real. I saw girls whose mothers were earning their living by doing laundry work. These same girls learned from their mother how to do laundry work, but then went to school and lost any desire to do any type of laundry work. Instead, with their new education, they came out wanting more costly dresses, more costly hats and shoes. Their wants had been increased, but their ability to supply their wants had not been increased at all, and this led many of them down the wrong path. Booker T. Washington and Tuskegee Institute. Booker T. Washington started Tuskegee with 30 students that were above the age of 15 and who had some education. These were the requirements at the time. Many of them were former teachers, and when they examined the pupils for the schools, many of the students performed higher than those who had previously been their teachers. It was also interesting to note how many big books some of them had studied and how many high-sounding subjects some of them claimed to have mastered. The bigger the book and the longer the name of the subject, the prouder they felt of their accomplishments. Some had studied Latin or Greek and thought that that entitled them to some special distinction within the school. In fact, one of the saddest things I saw during the month travel around the city was a young man who had attended some high school, sitting down in a one-room cabin with grease on his clothes filled all around him and weeds in the yard and garden, engaged in studying a French grammar. This was because he wasn't able to make a living for himself. Booker T. Washington wasn't impressed with any so-called learned person who wasn't able to provide for themselves. The students who came first to the university seemed to be fond of memorizing long and complicated rules in the grammar and mathematics, but had little thought or knowledge of applying these rules to everyday affairs of their life. Olivia A. Davidson came to the Institute as a teacher and later became his wife. There was no other person that did more for the building of Tuskegee than her. Every student that came to Tuskegee had learned some manual work, regardless of their income, and many parents protested, but Mr. Washington paid them no mind and the school enrollment continued to increase. As a result, the students and teachers were able to build all of the buildings of the school except for about 2. They also learned how to make bricks, as there wasn't any place where this could be done in the town. And they were not only able to use the bricks for the buildings that they built, they were able to also supply the town with bricks. Great men. Booker T. Washington thought that since General Armstrong fought against the white man in the South during the Civil War, that he harbored ill feeling towards them. He soon learned by his visits to Southern white people and from his conversations with them that the general was also concerned about the happiness of the white race there as well as the black. He cherished no bitterness against the South. From this, he learned that great men cultivate love and that only little men cherish a spirit of hatred. And this stuck with him because General Armstrong was one of his strongest supporters and his favorite mentor. A 5-minute speech. I always make it a rule to make a special preparation for each address. No two audiences are exactly alike. It is my aim to reach and talk to the heart of each individual audience, taking it into my confidence very much as I would a person. When I am speaking to an audience, I care little for how or what I am saying is going to sound in the newspapers or to another audience or to another individual. At the time, the audience before me absorbs all of my sympathy, thought, and energy. Booker T. Washington was very successful in his endeavors to raise funding for Tuskegee. And he realized that the more he came into contact with wealthy people, the more he believed that they are growing in the direction of looking upon their money simply as an instrument for which God had placed in their hands to do good with. I never go to the office of Mr. John D. Rockefeller, who more than once has given generously to Tuskegee, without being reminded of this. The close, careful, and minute investigation that they often do before making investments in a business enterprise is the same thing that they do when giving for a charitable reason or for a social enterprise. Dream big. One of Booker T. Washington's dreams was to have the President of the United States come to visit Tuskegee. In November of 1897, he put this plan into action. By 1898, he was able to get a promise from the president to come visit, and the president came on the 16th of December. This was not just because of his 1 year of planning, but all the years of hard work that he did that went into making Tuskegee a reputable institution in the nation, and might I add, across the world. From 30 students, the institution had grown under his leadership to over 1,100 students from 27 states and territories, from Africa, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and many other countries. There were 3 principles that he followed in his school. First, that the student shall be so educated that he shall be enabled to meet the conditions as they existed now in the part of the South where he lived. In a word, to be able to do the thing in which the world wants to be done. Second, every student who graduates from the school shall have enough skill coupled with intelligence and moral character to enable him or her to make a living for himself and others. And third, to send every graduate out feeling and knowing that labor is dignified and beautiful, to make each one of them love labor instead of trying to escape it. In Tuskegee, Booker T. Washington had accomplished his life work. He built an institute that the entire nation could be proud of. Both black people and white people, both men and women in the North and men and women in the South. This was evident in how mostly everyone that had the opportunity to support and give to his school did so according to their means. Okay, family, thanks for watching. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Like I always say, love you, and remember, live your best life.